And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska marine weather on this Wednesday, July 17th. And we start out this Wednesday afternoon looking at the sea ice. Much of the lower Chukchi Sea, the coastline there, open, free of ice. We still have ice, but it is melting off along the Arctic coast from Utqiagvik to Kaktovik. And again, this will just continue to slowly happen as we go through the mid and late summer period. As far as temperature-wise, we are going to see some warmer readings along the north slope coming up here through the weekend and early next week. So this will allow for some more of the ice along the shoreline there to melt away. But in the meantime, weather systems of note late tonight into, say, Thursday morning, another little impulse coming out of the North Pacific could enhance an area of rain or some showers across the panhandle as we go through the day Thursday, but not as heavy as the batch that is currently working its way through the northern panhandle this Wednesday afternoon and evening. Those rains will be diminishing overnight. We have another little system and trough that extends northward up Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley. That's going to have an area of rain along these areas, including the Anchorage Bowl, where another half inch of rain could fall with that system. And then way out toward the western Aleutians, southwest of there, we have an area of low pressure and occluded front that'll be taking shape. By the time we get into Thursday afternoon, there's another little weak low impulse that'll try to ride northwestward along the outer Gulf Coast for Friday. So the potential for showers to continue, at least some scattered lighter showers will linger across the panhandle, not just Thursday, but Friday and probably even into Saturday. Things are going to start to dry out, though, in the interior by the time we get into Friday, as a result of a ridge of high pressure, especially in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, that are going to take shape, so that by Friday afternoon we still have a little weak low off the southwest coast there of the panhandle with some lingering scattered light showers, but drying conditions, improving weather here. It's going to mean lighter winds along the Gulf Coast and the Alaska Peninsula. The system out toward the western Aleutians will have some winds with it, nothing too terribly high, maybe as high as 30 knots or so. And then this front coming into the northwest coast is going to actually weaken, fall apart, stall out here over eastern Russia and try to come back north as a warm front. So looking at Thursday, across the panhandle, inner channel, still some lingering showers, some maybe steady or light to occasionally moderate rain in the southern part of the panhandle. Southeast winds 10 knots there, Dixon entrance, waves a couple of feet. Stevens Passage, north winds 10 knots, variable winds 5 knots, waves a foot or two there, Lynn Canal. Winds will generally be northwesterly off of Gustavus and Sitka at 10 knots, but northeasterly south of Sitka to Craig, and just variable winds up there toward Cape Suckling around 5 knots. For Friday, for the inner channels, southeast winds to 20 knots, Dixon entrance, 3-4 foot waves. Northeast winds 10 knots, Stevens Passage, waves a couple of feet. North winds to 15 knots with 2 foot waves there within Lynn Canal. South of Sitka, east-southeast winds to 25 knots, swells 4 to 6 feet. Once you get Sitka on up toward Gustavus, winds will be out of the east-northeast 10 to 15 knots before turning northerly and flipping around to the west there, Cape Suckling with swells of 4 feet. Quieter conditions across the northwestern Gulf, variable winds around 10 knots off the Kenai coast outside of Hinchinbrook entrance and the entrance of Cook Inlet, waves just a few feet. Within Prince William Sound, look for southeast winds in the wider expanse here, 10 knots, waves a couple of feet, and upper Cook Inlet variable winds around 10 knots. For Friday, more of the same. Winds will generally be variable around 10 knots outside of Hinchinbrook entrance and along the Kenai coast. Look for westerly winds, 10 knots within Prince William Sound, 2 foot waves. Variable winds upper, lower Cook Inlet, but north winds to 10 knots there through middle Cook Inlet, especially near Anchor Point. Variable winds around 10 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island for Thursday. Otherwise, across the peninsula, generally northwest winds around 15 knots, waves 2-3 feet on the Pacific side and 2 feet or so on the Bering side. Variable winds around 10 knots continue in the vicinity of Kodiak Island for Friday. West winds there within Bristol Bay, but variable winds central and lower Alaska Peninsula at just 10 knots and waves not much more than a couple of feet. Eastern Aleutians, variable winds will flip around though and become southeast, increasing to 25 knots Atka through and west of Adak, and then eventually easterly to 25 knots, Kiska to Shemya. And for Friday, look for southeast winds anywhere from 15 to as high as 20 knots over the eastern Aleutians, turning southerly to 25 knots, Atka to Adak, and 20-knot southerly winds west of Adak, becoming easterly there north of Kiska and just east of Shemya. And for areas within Bristol Bay, north winds on Thursday, 10 knots. Kuskokwim Bay, northwest winds to 15 knots. Variable winds around the Pribilofs at just 10 knots with swells of 2 feet. Winds westerly along the lower Yukon Delta and into Norton Sound at 15 to 20 knots with waves of 3 to 4 feet. And for Friday, north winds within Bristol Bay, 10 knots. Northwest winds around 15 knots, Kuskokwim Bay. Southeast winds to 20 knots around St. Paul, waves 4 feet. Southeast winds to 25 knots, St. Matthew. And then generally west to southwest winds 10 to 15 knots along the Yukon coastline on up into Norton Sound. For areas on the west side of St. Lawrence Island, southwest winds to 25 knots with 4 5-foot swells. Coming up through the Bering Strait, look for southwest winds 20 knots. Maybe 4 5-foot waves. And then as we get up off of Cape Lisburne, Point Lay, winds could be south-southwest to 25 knots. Otherwise, winds will have a southerly component, Utqiagvik to Prudhoe Bay at 10 to 15 knots, and then more westerly, 10 knots there at Kaktovik. And then for Friday, winds along the central eastern Arctic coast, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots. Those winds increase southwesterly to south winds 25 to 30 knots from Utqiagvik down through Point Hope, with waves as high as 8 feet there just to the west-northwest of Point Lay. Lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait, look for south-southwest winds right around 20 to 25 knots, continuing back through then the north side of St. Lawrence Island.